All right. Good evening, afternoon, whatever it counts as, everybody. We're on to the ninth part of the tutorial. Now, I think I remember one of the things I might have gotten tripped up on previously, and then I, I just moved off of it. I'm pretty sure should be able to get it back. There's actually two things I wanted to say. So first of all, the indefatigable hexadecimal did respond to the comment in Reddit, and the thing that I thought was an omission or a bug was one. I also got a little bit of context for just the state of the project. So apparently this is a page that isn't that easy to update, which makes sense, right? Like, so far as I can tell, everybody is doing this for love. And so, if you make a really popular tutorial and either life conspires to make it so that you can't update it, or alternatively, you just simply lose interest. And I'm not trying to suggest that that's what's happened here. But there's any number of reasons why something may not necessarily get updated. And it's, the appropriate response is to be happy that the thing exists rather than just sort of say, I'm mad, we don't have an update or something like that. Especially because all of this information is available for free. So if there's a case of something really, really missing, we, presumably somebody can make a new one. So I only wanted to point that out just because I'm probably overly cautious on things like this, but I also have noticed a tendency to rub people the wrong way when I am not deliberately trying to do so, right? Like, obviously, if I write something provocative that's intended to be provocative, I can't turn around and just sort of say, hey, I'm upset that you got upset by this. But, I seem to be one of those ones that people take very personally, and I want to express nothing but gratitude for these resources existing. And I specifically wanted to just mention my gratitude to Hexadecimal, who, in addition to continuing to maintain the library that this tutorial relies on quite heavily, has really been going out there and answering a lot of people's questions, including my own. And obviously, a lot of what I ask is the sort of thing that, a slightly better or more informed developer could potentially answer on their own. So I sort of appreciate that some of this is probably just Google it level, and yet I've never really been made to feel like like I'm inconveniencing someone. So all of that to say, I know we're about halfway through the tutorial. Now, there's nothing saying that people have to do this tutorial once a year. They can do this whenever they jolly well want. But this is definitely an indicator to me that it was the right decision to join along with the RoguelikeDev community to do this tutorial, because, it's just very nice to have an encouraging environment in which you can ask these kinds of questions. So I encourage you to participate, whether it is this year or future years, because it's been a rewarding experience. And also some of the comments that you've left have been very nice on these various videos. So anyways, I don't want to spend too much time on the preliminary stuff, because there's just one, and this one I should actually be embarrassed for being tripped up on. But if I recall correctly, it was within item action. And I was like, wait a minute. Doesn't activate have more than one argument? And technically yes, in the sense that every every function or method with will have theoretically more than, I guess every one would be wrong, but like if you're going to have something other than self, you're going to, I think I've lost it now. But yeah, no, this is kind of the shooting offense, because I've actually pointed out this sort of stuff before. So let me see if I can find it again. So we've got self item consumable activate self. So we want to find the consumable item. Okay, so here we go. Healing consumable activate. It takes self action actions item action. And of course, this is where perhaps, had I been paying attention, the revelation would have been here. So my initial mistake was just looking at the self and it's like, oh, we have a parameter named self, and we have actions, item, action. This is very standard. I don't think we have ever had an instance where we have a method that does not have self. I think this might actually be automatically, I don't recall, but it may actually be the case where it may even automatically be added even if you don't. But it's probably a good idea to be explicit about it anyway. So it's probably better for me just to pretend that this thing doesn't exist. And then we take a look down. I'm like, oh, self, right? That's the same self. No, it is not, right? It is the self that exists within item action, which inherits from action. And of course, what was the parameter here? Action, actions.item action. Right. So this should not have been a mystery, but it's just simply the similarity of the name tripped me up. So that didn't take a whole lot of time to figure out after I recalled what I was confused by, and I suppose I should feel a little bad that I I was tripped up by that. But yeah. Also, this is a wonderful excuse to not do the things that I probably should be doing right now, but it's still hot and I'm having fun. So range scrolls and targeting, it's not as long as the other ones, judging by the little block here, but I'm hoping to keep this under 3 hours. So let's see how we can do that. Part 9, range scrolls and targeting. Adding health potions was a big step, but we won't stop there. Let's continue adding a few items, this time with a focus on offense. We'll add a few scrolls, which give the player a one-time ranged attack. This gives the player a lot more tactical options to work with and is definitely something you'll want to expand on in your own game. Before we get to that, let's start by adding the colors that we'll need for this chapter. So it doesn't explicitly say open up the colors file, but hopefully at this point it's clear where that's going to be coming from. So we've got needs target. This is, of course, one of these cases where I'm not really going to be investigating the meaning of the symbols here. I realize that they will correspond to the 256 values that you can enter in. I just think I have more fundamental issues that I need to work out that aren't that aren't related to the hex values. Although, you can make some inferences, right? So if you know that this is red, green, and blue, the fact that there's the first argument here, FF's probably 255. The fact that we have white here is maximum values for all of them. Black, of course, sensibly black for all of them, and so a solid color. So, you could test the assumption here by replacing 0x0 with 0x50 FF if you thought that was the most important thing that you could be doing at the time. I do not, so I will not. But let's start simple. With a spell that just hits the closest enemy, we'll create a scroll of lightning which automatically targets an enemy nearby the player. The first thing that we need is a way to get the closest entity to the entity casting the spell. Let's add a distance function to entity, which will give us the distance to an arbitrary point. Open entity.py and add the following function. So this is kind of interesting, right? What I always think is sort of helpful, even if I don't necessarily wind up implementing it this way, it's always sort of nice to think in your head, how might I have solved this? And of course, we had pathfinding with our with the enemies before, so there may be something to that. I don't know whether or not that would create situations where you have lightning that goes around a corner or whatever. But, in this case here, we have demonstrated a couple of cases already in the game where the sorry, I'm totally blanking. We've had a couple of cases here where we've needed to calculate distance in certain ways. So it's it's a thing to maybe keep in the back of my head, even if I don't ultimately wind up using it. Okay, so we're adding math, and after place, we will now figure out distance. And the other thing that you can notice too, right, is that distance is not it's not a part, it's not an attribute, or I think it would be called an attribute. Anyways, it's not something you can pull out of the class. It's something that you calculate, which of course makes perfect sense. I don't see a whole lot of value. I think if you were to make it an attribute, then effectively you would be calculating at each move, and that just doesn't really seem to be a particularly useful thing. You are only going to need that information at certain times. But again, there are certain choices that are, even if they're ones that are maybe obvious, I think there's sometimes certain choices that are communicated even by saying it's like, okay, so this is a method rather than something else. Turn the distance between the current entity and the given XY coordinate. There is something kind of interesting on this choice. This is not like a huge deal, but I actually very rarely see the math library used, because in my work at least, we're almost always in NumPy or have it loaded in. And I don't think we have NumPy loaded in this particular file, but just because NumPy is already used, we already know it. I'll see that I don't think it makes any difference at all in this particular case here. But and then for those of you who have ever sat in a math class and said, when are we ever going to use this? Well, here's our friend Pythagoras. So now is the moment that we use this. Congratulations, you're a real mathematician. You can write your apology to your math teacher in a future episode. With that, we will add the component that will handle our shooting lightning bolt. Add the following class to consumable.py. I may need to step away for a very brief minute. I didn't fill my water, but I will. I'm kind of aware that recording these videos, like, it's not exactly a stream. I really, where I can, try to avoid just editing videos, because like the whole idea of taking the time to edit like 10 seconds out of a main video. Actually, you know what? I'm gonna do this now. Just sorry, I know this is really terrible on YouTube, but I will be back in a very, very brief second. All right, sorry about that. Rather than talk about it, I figured it'd be shorter to just actually do it. Okay, so we have the component that will handle shooting our lightning bolt. We are adding to consumable.py. We'll add that after healing consumable. And we already have an indication here that we're going to be I think that's already implied from the prose above it at the start of the tutorial anyway. But the fact that it specifies a lightning damage consumable as opposed to some other type of damage is notable. So class and actually, as an aside here, so trying to think in terms of classes as opposed to my usual way of working with things, I probably myself wouldn't have done lightning damage consumable on its own. I think it would be, so this idea here, right, we've got this healing consumable. You can imagine that there's a few different forms of healing. So a good example of this would be, and I think actually Cyberpunk uses this convention. So there are two types of healing, and you can choose to get a larger overall amount, but it's distributed over a certain period of time. Or you can get this big sort of one boost to your health, and it's maybe a lower total amount, but you get it instantly. So clearly one is more helpful on short notice in a firefight, whereas one is a little bit more effective if you know you'll be behind cover. And clearly you're going to choose one over another depending on how you've built your character. And I think there's a similar a similar idea that you can use inside of this game here, right? We talked previously about how, you can make, you can have like 1,000 levers, right? But you're going to have to write all of that. And sometimes there is a benefit to learning, how to make the most of sort of one button. And then you add a second button and realize that you're not just doing two distinct things with two different buttons, but in fact, you're enabling a lot of interactions as well as all of the other things that you can do even with just one button. Similarly, I think there may be some value in terms of applying that thinking to things such as healing and whatnot. So for my own part, I would probably say it's like, okay, I have a healing consumable, and then maybe there's a set of things that will wind up healing you. And likewise, there can be damaging consumables, but there can be different forms, right? So traditionally, you'll have things like fireballs, which have area of effect. Things like lightning may be a little bit more precise in terms of damage. Maybe you want certain types. You could do damage over time. That's obviously a huge convention inside of things like MMOs. But also, you could maybe imagine certain types of damage will work in terms of like going through cover, right? So attack the nearest enemy regardless of cover, as opposed to lightning damage, which maybe would, you need to have like line of sight or something like that. So there's a few different ways that you can imagine both of these things working, and it feels like healing consumable. Now, it may be that, healing consumable is just shorthand for healing potion, and there's only ever going to be one type of healing. But likewise with lightning damage consumable, right? I kind of wonder if there would be some sense in terms of making a class of sort of damaging items, and then lightning becomes one among many. And I think in the end, the major decision behind that would be like, I think right now these consumables just have an activate. Oh, sorry, there's get action, activate, and consume. So in the end here, all we're really doing is changing the activate. And so then that sort of invites the question is like, okay, well, other than changing activate, like, is there really something else that you need? And then maybe you're like, okay, well, no. So that's, again, I'm kind of just free associating here, but it's sort of where I'm trying to take some of the lessons from this tutorial into my own thinking. Okay, so we will set up our old friend init. Target, none. This is notable here, right, where we've got self maximum range. By adding 1.0, this is automatically turning this into a float. In fact, I'm curious here. So if I delete that plus 1.0, yep, does say that it's an int. Cool. And that's the same thing that we learned when you do the double slash. That one was actually a surprise to me, that even though it is sort of it truncates if you pass it a float as an argument, it will still actually turn that into a float. It makes sense. It's consistent with Python, but just it's not the sort of thing you'd maybe expect. The intuition is that you get an integer back, which is because that's the main reason you use it. Okay, so for actor in self engine game map actors, so we go through the list and see who the smallest one is. If actor is not consumer, self parent visible, This is one of these cases where this also feels a little funny. Like I'm sure this is a perfect, like this is a fairly straightforward way of implementing this, but I always imagine well, I guess the other conditions here in terms of actor and consumer would be another one, but there's like you can sort an issue, you can sort it, and then you can provide an alternative sorting function, which presumably you would calculate the distance off of. Right, so you could pass this as the sorting, and then of course you just take the first thing in that list. I guess the thing that would be a little unusual here would be, again, you're putting these conditions on first, so maybe it does make sense to do the loop. But again, the other thing is that because I spend so much time in NumPy, people like yell at you if you if you do a loop for good reason, right? But I think what is it, Numba exists so that you can do loops without people yelling at you. So, and message log, add message. A lightning bolt strikes the target.name with a loud thunder for self-damage. I note here, so if take damage, self-damage, I think implicitly what this means is that magic ignores armor. Else me is close enough to strike. The init function takes two arguments, damage, which dictates how powerful the lightning bolt will be, and maximum range, which tells us how far it can reach. Similar to healing consumable, this class has an activate function that describes what to do when the player tries using it. It loops through the actors in the current map, and if the actor is visible and within range, it chooses that actor as the one to strike. If a target was found, we strike the target, dealing the damage. Using the take damage function we defined last time, which ignores defense. Okay, same point made here. And printing out a message. If no target was found, we give an error and don't consume the scroll. Also, the enemies don't take the turn. This might be one where if you... So, just thinking in terms of how this compares to other games, one case you could make in terms of the scroll is... at least one version of Warhammer, it's been a while since I've played it, but when you would charge in Warhammer, you could move, I believe the idea was you could move double your movement, but you were not allowed to measure. And so what you needed to do on the tabletop was you needed to sort of make an estimate in terms of what your army could do. And if you blew it in terms of the charge, there'd sort of be a penalty for that. So, and like the thing is that if you've got armies close enough, or you've got like cavalry or something like that, where just doubling the range just gives you so much margin of error that you don't really care about it. It's not a big deal. But you can kind of imagine how on the margins, if you really needed that charge, but you weren't so sure in terms of the distance, that might be a difficult choice to make. So it's kind of neat that they include that inside of the rules. And if you think about it, like that is some sort of precedent for this idea of the uncertainty in terms of the battle, and there being some consequences for taking certain risks, but also, of course, the big benefits of, say, being able to do a charge, being able to cover such a huge distance, and to be able to pin down an enemy unit, for instance. So the reason why I point that out is that the ability to attack an enemy through their armor is a pretty that seems pretty powerful. That's the sort of thing that we'd probably want to reserve for trolls. Now, interestingly enough, that does make things kind of interesting for orcs, right? If you've got a couple of orcs nearby and then you have a troll, you don't want to use the lightning scroll because it's just going to hop to the orc. And I imagine one interesting thing would be is if you can make chain lightning, right? Where maybe you have it sort of zap between the different units might be kind of fun as well. So already there's a little bit of subtlety in terms of how the lightning scroll goes. But if you thought that maybe this is a particularly powerful item and you didn't just want to go and say, we're going to limit the number of these things that appear on the map, another option that you might consider would be, how do we, maybe what we do here is we say that if you try to cast this thing and it doesn't have a target that you're looking for, this will actually be a case where the enemy does get to take a turn. And to a certain extent, that's not that big of a hardship for you, right? The enemy getting closer means it's that much more likely that an enemy will move, is going to be in range for the attack. Obviously, you're not going to be, in the current form of the game, you're not currently going to be attacked by an enemy because they would be hit by the lightning on its own. But you can kind of see how maybe this idea that magic, something that's maybe a bit harder to understand or something more powerful, within both the conventions of sort of the types of worlds that roguelikes normally take place in, not to imply that they're only fantasy games. I think Cogmind would be an example, or I think it's formerly known as the Doom roguelike. I think it's called Jupiter Hell now or something like that. Certainly there are other games that don't just rely on the fantasy setting. But you can sort of see how the conventions that these games tend to follow, that magic might work a little bit differently, and that this idea of treating it as an impossible action, you might want to question that and say, hey, maybe we can do something different here. And again, that's not a criticism of the choice here, just an example in terms of where you might want to push things in a different direction if you think that would lead to some interesting moments. All right. Similar to healing consumable, the class has an activate function that describes we already covered this. And if no target was found, we give an error and don't consume the scroll. In order to use this, we will actually need to place some lightning scrolls on the map. We can do that by adding the scroll to the entity factories to entity factories.py and adjusting the place entities function in procgen.py. Let's start with entity factories.py. Okay, so we are adding consumable as a whole. So presumably we're going to have to unpack consumable for the healing consumable now. Yep. And now we can add the lightning scroll. I really would have thought that it would let me tab complete. Guess not. Wow, 20. Okay. That feels quite powerful. All right. Notice that we are also importing consumable instead of the specific classes inside, which affects our declaration of health potion. This will save us from having to add a new import every time we create a new consumable class. I did sort of gesture to this in the previous entry, by the way, when I think it was entity. No, it was input handlers, now that I remember. But we had a whole bunch of actions, but we're also importing the action library. So essentially that's what I was talking about in the previous episode, where we could do action.bump action as opposed to just call them in individually. I've never really seen a project which does both the individuals as well as the sort of, I guess it would be called the parent. Anyways, the module. But I'm not going to sort of pound my fist on the table and say, this is a disaster. Why are you doing it this way? I'll, if I want to change it around after the fact, I can do that on my own. Okay, open up procgen.py, and we are changing the room generation, I think. Where are we? Number of monsters, number of items. Okay, yeah, so we get rid of the health potion here. So item chance, random. It's a 30% chance that you get a scroll, which incidentally is a higher chance than a troll spawning. So this feels quite player friendly right now. Now, another thing I'll point out is this is probably not how the current form makes sense. Now, I've only ever heard of this term, but I'm going to assume that this is what people are referring to. So there's the idea of like the loot table, and I'm assuming that this is basically like a series of chances. So like, I'm imagining that if this were some sort of role-playing game, it would be some die roll and what you get as a result. And then of course, because it's in a computer program, it's not actually a die roll, and maybe the calculation is a little bit more complicated, but it's analogous to that sort of thing. So right now, this is fine, right? You roll your dice, and then you say, okay, if your number is below 0.7, strictly below 0.7, but for continuous variables, that doesn't mean anything. It's the same. But basically, you're going to get a health potion, and then if it was 0.7 or above, then you're going to get the lightning scroll. Now you can see how this might get a little tricky when you have more than one item. I also have to imagine at a certain point you're not going to be able to speak too precisely about the probabilities of certain events, or at the very least to adjust them, you're going to need to do some, you're going to need to sort of think it through for a number of different steps inside of the table. So all of this is to say is I imagine if we were to add lots and lots of items, this is probably not going to be the way that we decide to do it. There'll maybe be a variation on that, but I have to imagine that this probably would be something that you would want to set aside. In fact, maybe even if you have, I'm assuming that probably part of the job of designing a game is actually to work out these kinds of probabilities, find out what would be sort of fun or what feels good. And so I could sort of imagine that that these would be sort of left to a separate file, a little bit like colors. And then, people who maybe have better taste than I do could sort of run in and say, all right, we're going to sort of tweak the probability here. And then presumably from that table, it'll take those values that they assign and put them into something that makes sense to the computer. All right, like with monsters, we are getting a random number and deciding what to spawn based on a percentage chance. Most of our items will still be health potions, but we should have a chance of getting a lightning scroll instead now. Run the project and try picking up some lightning scrolls and zapping some trolls. Not orcs, huh? All right, cannot import the name consumable from components consumable. That's unexpected. Oh, of course. Spent all that time talking about it, but didn't remove the important part. All right. This is a friendly start. 2 health potions to get us started. Oh no. If I want, I can drink the health potions now. Health potions all the way down. All right, there's the lightning, so you need to press F to use the lightning scroll. Ha ha ha. I should have actually also tested the mouse over on it. Now this is a rare chance. So yes, the health potion works for the mouse over. This is a rare opportunity for us to... Oh, nope, sorry, my bad. It was just the view distance. I was going to say I wanted to see if I could go past the barriers of the map, but I was ignoring the fact that it actually has a wall. Okay, I might have used up the only... Oh, there it is. So, lightning scroll. I guess the tilde looks kind of scroll-like. And because I'm having so much fun... Okay, now they've got them all over the place. Should we add inventory management to the game as an extension? All right. I don't think I'm going to be able to close the distance between myself and the troll, so the... Oh, there we go. Not close enough to strike. Cool. Nyah, nyah, nyah. All right. Nope, we have one more section of the room to go through. We won't find any enemies there, but it feels wrong not to explore the full map. My health is already full. All right, so that was fun. Everything works, and we don't have any warnings. That was a bit on the easy side. Let's try something more challenging, something that requires us to target an enemy or an area before shooting off the spell. This will take a few steps, but one of the things that we can do on the way to the goal is add a way for the player to look around the map using either the mouse or keyboard. We already kind of did this with the mouse in part 7. However, most roguelikes allow the user to play the game entirely with the keyboard. Open up inputhandlers.py and add the following contents. This gives us a chance to talk about. So what I was talking about before here, right, is from actions, we're importing action, bump action, pickup action, wait action. I guess this is actually slightly different because it's components.consumable as opposed to here we have actions. We're specifically bringing in action. But anyways, if I was doing this myself, I'd probably just delete this and then I'd do action.action and so on. But I'm not going to harp on this. I just wanted, it was a chance for me to sort of elaborate on something that I'd said before. Okay, so after wait keys, we will add another set of keys. So confirm keys. So again, we're using the modern convention. This is just to avoid it complaining later. And then select index handler. So that comes after inventory drop handler. class select index handler, ask user event handler, handles asking the user for an index on the map. Okay, start with init. So again, we get the actions.engine because we're importing actions now. We do use super init engine here, although we need to add our docstring first. To the player when this handler is constructed. Player equals self engine player. One thing I do kind of notice doing this tutorial, because I haven't sort of sat down and thought for myself, this is one of the reasons why I try to talk through this, but because I haven't actually thought through the individual structures of the game, right? So this idea of saying that players exist inside of engines and engines exist inside of maps, or so on and so forth. I'm sure I got that wrong, but I do... it's sometimes not natural for me to say, it's like, oh, okay, of course, you know, this needs to define a player. Now, sometimes, obviously, we're making a new class here, so we're sort of, we're setting that right now anyway. But clearly, in this case, we had a player in, like, because we have an engine, right? That is one of the things that is coming from the init, and I believe that is coming from a step higher, right? The ask user event handler. I'm pretty sure if we mouse over, it'll say... No, it does not. Okay. Okay. Event handler. Optional action. Okay. But yeah, so all of that to say, it's I can't remember if I talked about this in the series or not, but I there's an essay that I quite like by Arthur Schopenhauer called "On Thinking for Oneself." And he quotes Johann Wolfgang von Goethe in Faust, I think. And I don't remember the exact phrasing, but it's sort of this idea of needing to... I won't say the quote, but like basically the idea here is that you sort of need to earn your intellectual inheritance. That by thinking for oneself, you sort of have this possession of knowledge, and it is a level of certainty that comes from doing the work, as opposed to reading a book and just sort of having it, you know, having that sort of just sort of impress itself on your mind. And one of the drawbacks about, at least for me, a first reading of something like that is it definitely sounds like someone who is completely full of himself, and it's like, you read books, fill your mind with other people's thoughts. And that's not what that essay is saying. In fact, it very specifically at the end sort of talks about how this is not possible to do at all times. And when you are not doing it for yourself, yes, of course you should be reading books. But that there is a difference between, and I mean, the modern version of this would be, you know, using... you know, one of the large language models or Googling it or anything like that. Absolutely nothing wrong with any of that. But it is different from sort of wrestling with the challenges. And if, you know, I don't think it's my job to sell people on Schopenhauer's arguments, but I always sort of like to think, if you think of the number of times that you have game developers saying, you know, make a game, right? Go out there and make a game. You know, do you want to get into the games industry? Make a game, make a simple game, finish a game. Really, that is implicitly accepting Schopenhauer's arguments, that there is just something that you learn by doing the work and running into the problems. That can't really just be communicated by, you know, reading the books. Now, and again, you will learn a lot if you read about books if you read books by designers about things that did well or didn't do well. And of course, I'm not in a position to talk about designers, but this would be true for anything. You know, if you are in the military, if you're, if you're doing those decisions, reading Jim Mattis on how he uses his reading to give himself an advantage on the battlefield, I figure if somebody whose job is literally life and death will be saying read some books and understand what's going on, clearly, this is not to devalue what knowledge you can get from reading. But on the other hand, you don't necessarily want these things to become substitutes, right? In the end, if I were to just read 100 different books about people making roguelikes, I would not necessarily get the knowledge that comes from sitting and doing this. And likewise, because I'm not the one sort of sitting down and wrestling with this idea of how do I create a system under which a player will try to select different targets based on keyboard inputs. The idea of saying, okay, I definitely am going to need a player, and the player exists inside of the engine. These sorts of things, I'm taking that because the tutorials told me, as opposed to sort of owning that knowledge and saying that, yes, it is of course natural that I would take the player from the engine, and so on and so forth. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to do such a long digression, but it's worth saying. I think it's worth saying at least. So, okay, on render. Of course, the parameter for console might make a little more sense here just because we're talking about rendering, right? There's something that we're rendering to. A little confused why background gets white and foreground gets black. But we'll see. I think I'm going to need to actually see this thing before I fully understand why it takes the form that it does. Okay, the events key down. Sadly, it doesn't know about optional yet. Or it does, and maybe just the code. Okay, no super to work with here, so key event sim. If key in move keys, fire 1. Event mod and right, okay, so we're either shift works. Okay, makes sense. So if we push one of the shift keys, we'll move by 5 rather than 1. If event mod event keysim, or presumably this will be the right control. I'm not 100% sure how the operators in Python work here. So I know we've typed and before, but I think this is specifically because tcod relies on NumPy, which is why we're using these symbols instead of and or. We could test. I mean, I could try ripping out the ampersand and horizontal line. I don't know if that has a special name, but I suppose the question would be like, what does that prove? Presumably, a more straightforward way of investigating that would be just look at the code. All right, here we go. Event modifier. So what we want to do is hold down Alt, Control, and Shift, and then move, what, 1 times 5, 50. Yeah. I'm definitely trying that, but... all right. X, Y, self, engine, mouse location, dx, dy equals move keys, key, x plus dx times the modifier, y, same story, times the modifier. Map the cursor to the map size. So it's nice to see the word clamp being used here, just because I've been saying that before and being a little worried that I was misusing a term. And same story with the y. So 0 or min, y self engine, game map, height -1, elf engine, mouse location equals x and y. This is the one that we've just adjusted. And return nothing. And then else if key in confirm keys. My God, what just happened? My bad. All right. Yeah. So the reason why it was implicitly complaining about that is that I was already returning none. So there's no other way for me to go. Any code that would come after that clearly wouldn't be in define EV key down. Okay. Sorry. Elif key in confirm keys, return self on index selected, and then we unpack the mouse location. Sorry, I need a minute to just think about this. So select index handler on a key down. So you press the key, assign that to key. If you're in move keys, we check to see if you're doing a modifier. We adjust the mouse location accordingly. And we return nothing. If I push a key in confirm keys, don't think we've defined on index selected. Well, itself, of course we haven't. So this makes sense why I haven't done this yet. But presumably we perform some action on the thing that is highlighted. And if it's none of those cases, if we've pushed D, for instance, I guess D is drop, so X. So super in this case is ask user event handler and ask user event handler. Okay, then we just get out of the we get out of the handler. That makes okay, yeah. So that makes sense. So I think what I'm getting here is, I mean, this is so comments. Just to be clear, like I'm not as stupid as I come off to some people who visit the live channel. What I'm just trying to do here is make sure that I understand. This is a completely intuitive way of handling a selector. So we're moving around the map with key down. We still need to implement on index selected, and this is a little bit like the inventory, where if we just push something that doesn't have an order, we're getting out of this selection option, which again would make this just like any other game. I'm just taking a second here. Again, we're doing the work, so I want to make sure that I properly I'm properly following exactly what's happening here. So def ev mouse button down, almost. But we don't do super. Well, we do super eventually. Oh. So why do we do the splat? Because we have X and Y positions. Event button equals 1. Presumably the event button is, oh, you know what? How much you want to bet this is going to complain and say that there's a change to EV mouse button down? Well, there's no guarantee because keys are different from mouse inputs, but turn self dot on index selected, again not implemented yet. But what about controller support? On index selected, self x int y int turns an optional action when an index is selected, and after all of that, we raise a not implemented error. Okay, so as far as I can tell, and again, I think this is what so why don't you like, self is not defined, did I forget? Oh, my bad. I think this is already covered by the text in the tutorial, but what we have implemented now has nothing to do with taking actions. Everything here is essentially implementing the functionality that we've already had with our mouse. Select index handler is what we'll use when we want to select a tile on the map. It has several methods which we'll break down now. In it simply sets the mouse location to the player's current location. This is so that the cursor we're about to draw appears over the player first rather than somewhere else. Chances are the tile the player wants to select will be nearby. On render, we'll render the console as normal by calling super on render, but also adds a cursor on the top. That can be used to show where the current cursor position is. This is especially useful if the player is navigating around with the keyboard. EV key down gives us a way to move the cursor we're drawing around using the keyboard instead of the mouse. Using the mouse is still possible. By using the same movement keys we use to move the player around, we can move the cursor around with a few extra options. By holding Shift, Control, or Alt while pressing the movement key, the cursor will move around faster by skipping over a few spaces. This could be very helpful if you plan on making your map larger. If the user presses a confirm key, the method returns the current cursor's location. EV mouse button down also returns the location if the selected space is within the map boundaries. OnIndexSelected is an abstract method which will be up to the subclasses to implement. We do that immediately with LookHandler. LookHandler inherits from selectIndexHandler, and all it does is return to the main game event handler when receiving a confirmation key. This is because it doesn't need to do anything special, it's just used in the case where our player wants to have a look around. We can utilize LookHandler by adding this to EV key down in our main game event handler. Where are you? There's a side of me that kind of wants to start sort of packing these all up like this, but no, it's right below us. All right, my bad. After drop, else if key is tcod event key sim dot slash. By pressing the / key, you can look around the map with either the mouse or the keyboard. Pressing the escape key, or any non-movement key for that matter, exits this mode. Okay, so it says with that in place, we're going to implement a scroll. So I'd actually like to take a minute and just see what this looks like. Oop, push the wrong slash. Cool. All right, so a few warnings. Attribute. Oh, I should have known this one actually. So we'll adjust accordingly. Okay, so interestingly enough, the mouse button didn't actually do anything. Okay, now holding down Alt does not seem to have adjusted the... Shift has, Control has. Now Control is already so huge in terms of its movement that it's just not helpful. I am quite intrigued by the fact that the Alt isn't doing anything though. This would strike me as unintended. Sorry, I just want to make sure all of these are working as intended. Still trying to figure out exactly what the deal is with the... So like foreground white, background black seems a little different from what we're actually seeing here, but... Okay, so we're going to... I want to make these changes first. So we were at event handlers. Well, input handlers, but... So we'll head back up. We had tile RGB, and this should just be good old-fashioned RGB now. Most reliable. Don't use debuggers, just use print statements. Interesting. So I'm not getting the I pressed Alt, I am getting it when I press Control, though. Fascinating. I'm going to need to think about that. So I'm trying to think. So if we've got event mod. Here's the thing I'm not 100% clear on. So we've got a key right now, which is event.sim. And we've got key and move keys. But we're holding down a second key, which is left shift. So clearly there is more than... Clearly there's more than one. I think probably the best thing I can do here is just print key. Let's see what this is doing. I'm sorry, this is a complete digression, which is not really essential to the... Okay, so I'm holding down Alt and I do right. It does not help at all. Okay, there's two more things I'm going to try here. So first possibility here is that the Alt key is different from what I was expecting. There's a lot, so I can't really expect. Well, yeah, but see, we have Alt here, so... So what I'm going to do in this case, even though I know this is wrong, I'm actually going to do it the old way. And the reason I'm going to do it this way is so I can get the warning and just see if it's telling me... Well, one, I want to see if this does what I'm expecting it to. So that's obviously interesting if I get the correct behavior from the old style. And then on top of that, when it gives me a warning, I'm going to be able to see what the library itself tells me the replacement should be. So kmod l alt. Alt. All right. Play. So we go to view. We can move around without anything. So now we'll do left shift. And it's not warning me to... Now this is really interesting, right? This is very different behavior from what I was expecting. So this is when I'm using... Oops. So this is when I shouldn't hit 5. So this is without any modifiers. Then I do left shift, right? So as expected, this gives us a small adjustment to the movement. No surprises there. Control gives me a bigger movement. And then finally, Alt gives me the largest. And then presumably we do the same. Oh, sorry, wrong button. Well, this is an interesting question. So if we go, okay, so this is left shift up, left shift down, Alt up, down, Control up, Control down. Okay. Interesting. And again, it's not complaining about I think the time has come for us to take a look at tcod pi. Okay, Python 3.10 introduced match statements to which can be used to dispatch events more gracefully. So if I wanted an example of how to handle this, I should have just looked here. That is actually very funny that this is the exact this is exactly what we were talking about earlier on, and I said, okay, maybe this isn't the appropriate use. This is definitely going to be something that I consult for the future. Now, I'm specifically looking for, well, this is the source code, so maybe we just take a look at the document. So we are looking in events. Okay, so we've got event handling. Key down. There is this is my controller support, by the way. I can, of course, just search, but I'd rather not do that because I kind of get to see a little bit of I get to see sort of just an overall okay, here we go. I just kind of get to see the state of play and maybe learn some other things. So we've got keysim keyboard constants based on their symbol. These names are derived from SDL, except for the numbers, which are prefixed with N, since raw numbers cannot be a Python name. Oh, this is interesting. Okay. So there are... I'm not 100% sure what the story here is with these numbers, but this explains what I was seeing here. Left control, left shift, left alt. I'm going to make a note of these for myself. Seven 37425050. How about I do that from the top to the bottom? Left control is 107.37.42048. Left shift. One 7 107.37.42049. Alt 107.37.42050. R control 107.37.42052. R shift 107.37.42053. Ralt 737.42054. Okay. Return a key code from a scan code. Oh, here we go. Modifier. Keyboard modifier flags a bit field of held modifier keys. Use bitwise AND to check if a modifier key is held, which is exactly what's happening here. The following example shows some common ways of checking modifiers. So tcod event modifier, mod and tcod event modifier shift. Okay. So how much you want to bet this would be what fixes it? Don't need to shout modifier. So I don't know this will work for sure, but I'm feeling a little bit better about okay. So we take a look around. Oops. This is our usual movement. So if I do shift and up, okay, control and up, alt and up. Well, okay, that was a bad example. Cool. Now, in the interest of my complete understanding, actually, hang on. I wonder, so based on my understanding here, we could actually probably do even better and say, just taking a look at the list down below, okay, actually, here's what I'll do. So this is the left shift that I'm taking to the, I should probably put this at a landmark. So left shift to the left, right shift to the right, left control to the left, right control to the right, left alt to the left, right alt to the right. There we go. So this, again, I feel like I'm kind of over justifying my approach here. Now, one of the things that I'm missing in terms of this little inquiry is that I don't have a very good reason why the initial checks didn't work, right? So the original problem that we were running into is we had, for a key and move keys, we had sort of a modifier and it said if event mod and then there were individual key sort of values that were put in. And we know previously it sort of yelled at us to use keysim. So I sort of just automatically said, okay, we've always had this happen, so we'll just automatically apply that rather than get the complaint. And for one reason or another, using the keysim produced a different result than what I was expecting. And I think it probably has something to do with the way that the bitwise AND works, possibly the bitwise AND or the bit and slash or the bitwise or, although I imagine the AND is the culprit here. So I have to imagine that there was some sort of interaction between event mod and the specific key symbol as opposed to the modifier that created the the unexpected behavior. But taking the time to sort of look at the documentation, this is, I think, the first time we've actually taken the time to go and look into the documentation rather than sort of consult the tutorial or just sort of fool around inside of the program itself to try and solve this. But I learned a little bit about how TCOD works. And, am I in a situation where I'd probably use a lot of modifiers? Honestly, I think most of the time I would just say we live in an age where everybody has mouses. I'm not expecting people to sort of dial in, to some server I've set up and do everything in their terminal. I'd probably maybe get a little lazy in terms of the interactions. Can I think of other situations where I'd run into similar problems? I mean, gamepads, right? It's not uncommon to hold more than one key down. And if anything, this has kind of taught me a little bit about how handling multiple keys sort of works in terms of this. Not completely, but I at least have a little bit of an idea now in terms of, okay, so this would be where I go if I want to sort of work out some more specifics. So I don't know. I think this was worth doing for me. If nothing else, I also learned how to simplify a little bit. But yeah, I fully appreciate that. I probably could have lived with the imperfect implementation, or have not even bothered to, use these. Okay. Right. Okay. So, all right, with that in place, we can move on to implementing a scroll that asks for a target. Let's implement a confusion scroll, which will take a target and change that target's AI so that it stumbles around for a few turns before returning to normal. We need to define a new type of AI to handle how enemies act when they're confused. Open up ai.py and add the following. Okay, so we're adding random. Probably not a surprise there. And then we are also adding optional and then under actions, we've got action. We need a bump action. Melee movement and wait. Okay, we're good. And then after base AI, we are apparently adding confused. A confused enemy will stumble around aimlessly for a given number of turns. Then revert back to its previous AI. If an actor occupies a tile it is randomly moving into, it will attack. So presumably the previous AI is so that once you remove the confusion, you know what you had before. that one's fairly self-explanatory. Perform. Revert the AI back to the original state if the effect has run its course. Revert. If self turns remaining less than or equal to 0, self engine message log add message, the self entity name no longer confused. Else? Actually, this is no, this still works. Sorry, I was thinking for a minute here, but I think I confused myself rather than. I was just thinking about how the AI gets attached to an existing entity. So it's like, is it the case that everybody now implicitly becomes a confused enemy? But no, that is not how that's going to work. Like a confused enemy with a previous or a current AI that's not confused. But anyways, doesn't matter. Okay, pick a random direction. Okay. I feel like there's another way that this could be done without picking from the list, but I'm not up in arms about it. Did I remember to? Yes, I did. One minus one. Okay. And then tick down. Actor will try to move or attack in the chosen random direction. Okay, the init function takes 3 arguments: the entity, the actor who is being confused, the previous AI, the AI class that the actor currently has. We need this because when the confusion effect wears off, we'll want to revert the entity back to its previous AI. Turns remaining, how many turns the confusion effect will last for. Perform causes the entity to move in a randomly selected direction. It uses bump action, which means that it will try to move into a tile, and if there's an actor there, it will attack it regardless if it's a player or another monster. That is actually a fun possibility. Each turn, the turns remaining will decrement, and when it's less than or equal to 0, the AI reverts back and the entity is no longer confused. In order to inflict this status on an enemy, we'll need to do a few things. Obviously, we'll need a consumable that inflicts the confused enemy AI on an enemy. But we also need a way to select which enemy gets confused. To do that, let's expand on our select index handler from earlier. We can create a handler that allows us to select a single enemy and apply some sort of function on it. Open up inputhandlers.py and add the following class. Why is my mouse not responding? Sorry, I've also reached the time of day where my the sun is like shining directly into my eyes, so I'm trying to adjust accordingly, but I think it probably sounds like I'm off the mic. Sorry about that. Okay, input handlers. We already have that open. So we are also bringing in callable now. And after look handler, we're doing single ranged attack handler. And this is nice, right? Because we've talked about the there's look handler. We've talked about a confusion spell, which is an attack of some kind, but it's not a damaging attack. So in this case here, single ranged attack handler, presumably we can expand that to, you know, firebolt or ice bolt or something like that. Single ranged attack handler, select index handler, handles targeting a single enemy. Only the enemy selected will be affected. Okay, init. I think we also need to add the callable though, so we've got self engine. We don't unpack actions for that. We may later, but I'll worry about that later. Callback, callable, tuple, int, optional. So if I'm reading this correctly, so self is always the first part of the method. So the engine's the good old engine that we get from select index handler. So if I'm reading this correctly, callback has, oh dear. I forgot to add tuple. Okay, so the callable, this is presumably the target, and this is the thing we're going to do to the target, would be my guess here. We'll see if that's right. So we've initialized it with everything from the super plus the callback, def on index selected. Single ranged attack handler doesn't do much except define a callback function that activates when the user selects a target. Callback can be any function with a tuple of two integers, x and y coordinates. So single ranged attack handler can be used for any scroll or ranged attack that targets one location. I guess I should have said, I wonder if it says, no, it doesn't say anything about callable. Also, it says there is an error in here somewhere. I'll handle this in a minute. So single ranged attack handler can be used for any scroll or ranged attack that targets one location. So what do we pass as the callback? Let's define that now in consumable.py. Okay, so before we do that, statements must be separated by shame on me. So what do we pass as callback? Let's define that now in consumable.py. We'll add the component that causes the confusion effect called confusion consumable. Whoops. Please, just go back. Can't remember which side this was on, but it lives here now. All right, sorry. Consumable. Hang on. So we've got color. Why isn't inventory in here? We definitely use it. All right, I'm not going to question it. And then input handlers after impossible from put. Okay. After consumable, we will add confusion consumable. Okay. Now get action. What am I doing? All right, select a target location. Got to add a color. Right, because we haven't done the action yet. That's why consumer hasn't been used. Self, engine, event handler, single ranged attack, self, engine, callback. I like lambdas. Okay, I can't remember. I feel like we've talked about Lambda before, but in case this wasn't something that I talked about, Lambda is an anonymous function, so you can imagine, let's say that you wanted to square something. Actually, yeah, so let's say you're working with squared distances. So you want the smallest squared distance. So this would maybe be a way that you handle something like negative numbers. So you calculate a whole bunch of square distances and you want the item that's closest to you. So you say, all right, we're going to sort this list by square distance, but I don't have a square distance. So one thing you could do is you could define a function called square distance and it would do that calculation for you. And that's actually a really good idea to do that if you think that you're going to be calling that multiple times in the project, or if you're there's some, there's something that you're going to do. So for instance, there's actually a calculate distance in this case. Actually, I guess there's already a distance function inside of this, so maybe that's not such a good example. But anyways, I'm going to still run with square distance. So in this case here, let's just say you have an object, you're going to just spend the time squaring it. So, and you're only using it once. It's sort of like Kleenex, you use it once and throw it away. So in this case, rather than just defining a really simple function, even though it's a helper, what you can do here is you can do a lambda. And essentially what it does here is you're like, okay, we've got x, y, and then here's the body of the function. So we call item action on consumer, self-parent, and xy. These already exist. This is the specific argument that's being passed. Well, right now we're defining this this lambda, but it's just a nice little convenient way of working with a little function, a little anonymous function that you don't need to think about after using it. I like these, but okay. Excuse me. Turn none. Activate. Everything seems to be in order here. So the consumer, nope. Target. Okay, so if I can't see you, okay, so if we don't have something that we're pointing at, again, can't use the scroll. Target is consumer. Now, I think, frankly, you shouldn't do this. you should allow players to confuse themselves, or at the very least, ask them to confirm. So raise impossible. You cannot confuse yourself. And I think everybody who has watched these videos knows full well that is a filthy lie. All right, self engine message log. Add message. So assuming that we haven't tried to do the impossible, the eyes of the look vacant as it starts to stumble around. Commas. I don't know if we ever define the number of turns that confusion holds for, incidentally. I guess that happens at the creation. Okay, so I'm a little, right, target.ai. So I was a little suspicious about that dark gray text. This is one of the reasons why it's nice to use stuff like VS Code, or, I also once in a while use Emacs. I like, so one thing that's nice about Emacs is that learning that allows me, like in terms of my Mac, whenever all of the keybinds for Emacs work. So like I could be in the Apple email program, I could be in, Scrivener, I could be in any number of different things. And it's all the same key commands. Whereas here, if I did like Control N, that would produce something new. I'm sure there's a way to put Emacs key bindings in here, but I'm too lazy. But yeah, so obviously having something that sort of gives you little visual reminders that, hey, something's wrong, just helps me minimize the number of, I already have enough bugs that I introduce on my own. So, okay, confusion consumable takes one argument in init, which is number of turns. As you might have guessed, this represents the number of turns that the confusion effect lasts for. GetAction will ask the player to select a target location and switch the game's event handler to single ranged attack handler. The callback is a lambda function, an anonymous inline function, which takes xy as a parameter. Xy will be the coordinates of the target. The lambda function executes item action, which receives the consumer, the parent, the item itself, and the xy coordinates. Activate is what happens when the player selects the target. First, we get the actor at the location and make sure the target is 1, in sight, 2, a valid actor, and 3, not the player. If all of those things are true, then we apply the confused enemy AI to that target and consume the scroll. With the consumable component in place, we can add confusion scroll to entityfactories.py. Apparently that comes after actor, though. Or, sorry, troll. Okay, everything seems to be in order here. Now that we can create confusion scrolls, let's add some to the map. Open up procgen.py and adjust the part that places items to look like this. Okay, so lightning scrolls become considerably more rare. So the most likely thing is still a health potion. elif item chance 7.9. Entity factories, confusion scroll dot spawn dungeon XY. Feel free to adjust these percentage values however you see fit. To test out your confusion scrolls, you might want to mess with the numbers here. And this is fair, right? So if we take a look at what's going on, so random will be producing a number between 0 and 1, I believe. Does it not tell us? Tells us it produces a float, doesn't tell us. Bytes, integers, sequences. I don't know. I would be very surprised if this produced something other than 0 to 1. So 70% chance that we get a health potion, right? If your number is strictly less than 0.7, but again, for continuous variable. Well, okay. So technically, because it doesn't really mean anything to talk about a continuous variable on a computer, because it's a discrete thing, the less than or equal to does actually matter because it isn't actually infinite, but for all intents and purposes, continuous variable doesn't matter if it's less than or equal to 0.7. But so 70% of the possible outcomes for item chance will produce a health potion. We are outside of the 0.7 land, so strictly greater than 0.7. And as long as you are strictly less than 0.9, then you'll be a confusion scroll, which means that's a 20% chance of that happening. And then the final 10% chance is the lightning scroll. That's if you are 0.9 or higher. I think it goes up to like some 0.9 repeating. I don't think it actually goes up to 1. But I'm not going to test. All right. And this will also be interesting because I'm not 100% sure how we actually cast confusion. So that will be... Aha, let's fix that before we go too far. Did I misplace a comma? I did indeed. Thank you, Python error messages. And looks like we got a confusion scroll in the first room. Bring it. All right. You picked up a confusion scroll. I hope I didn't just kill everything in the dungeon. I was hoping to find like a big room full of baddies. Oh, this will be a good one. Okay, so we go to our inventory, take the confusion scroll. Oh, what button do I push? So, enter. Aha. Super has no attribute callback. So this is in... Oop. Okay, let's deal with this before I go too much further. So this was in consumable.py, but that doesn't seem to be where the problem is. Aha, I got lazy. Okay, so we're gonna quit out of the game. Ooh. Let's try that again. I'm getting lucky with the scrolls. So again, I want to see if we can Find a nice big room of baddies. Okay. Confuse you. The eyes of the orc look vacant as they start to stumble around. Nyuk, nyuk, nyuk. Oh, unbound local error. Cannot access local variable direction X when it is not associated with a value. That... Oh! Orc attacks orc for 3 hit points. So yeah, we had something exciting that happened there. And it's one of these cases where because we've run into something... let me make a note of that. So I think I'm going to just deal with this on my own time. Well, okay, sorry. Let's maybe not go that far. I will just see briefly if there's something that I can do. So I've got a bump action, direction X, direction Y. So these should be coming out of choice. Cannot access the local variable direction X when it is not associated with a value. Okay, so I guess what this implies is for some reason direction X and direction Y did not I was really lucky that I had these 2 orcs attack each other, but I'm actually kind of confused why we got into this state. Because what this is telling me here, so right, return bump action, self-entity, direction X, direction Y, perform, cannot access local variable direction X where it is not associated with a value. So what I would say here is that it tried to give direction X and direction Y a value, and it couldn't get it. Well, what happens when we do random choice? Well, it'll even tell me here, presumably, choose a random element from a non-empty sequence, right? So we've got our list here. What are the possible values? Well, -1, -1, 0, -1, 1, -1, -1, 0, 1, 0, -1, 1, 0, 1, 1, 1. So long as direction X exists, like I don't see a situation in which these couldn't have values. Oh, here's what we can do. We can open up the log. The orc is no longer confused. Okay, so, and that's specifically why... Oh, we killed the orc! No, sorry, that's me taking out the orc. Okay, no, so this is interesting. So the orc stops being confused. Of course. Yeah, so I think this, I actually have a feeling that whenever an orc stops being confused, yeah, the way I'm reading this, I don't think there is a situation in which, so I don't think this is unique to the fact that we had two orcs stumbling around and hitting each other. The way that I think what's happening here is that the orc ceases to be confused, right? So we're at self turns remaining less than or equal to 0. I can't see a situation where it would be less than 0, but just in case. So engine message log add message. The orc is no longer confused. Self entity AI, self previous AI. Makes sense, right? The direction of the orc is now going to be determined by the old AI, except that we don't exit perform. We completely skip over else, which is where direction X and direction Y are defined. Also, the self turns remaining -1, and instead we return a bump action, direction X and direction Y. However, we don't have a direction X and direction Y. So there's two things that I'm going to do. Number one, I'm going to test that assumption. I'm going to confuse another orc and see, confuse another enemy and see whether or not we get a similar problem. And in addition to that, I want to work my way out. And I actually have two potential solutions to this. One is a little bit easier than the other. But I kind of want to see if I can do both. But let's test the hypothesis first that this is the problem that I'm actually encountering, because I should be able to replicate the error just by simply waiting out the... Leave me alone, damn it. I can force the purple scrolls, obviously, but... Okay, we're getting kind of lucky on the potions. No confusion on this floor. Pretty sure we also just eliminated all the enemies. Okay, got unlucky on that dungeon. Run for your lives! Uh-oh. Oh, beautiful. Okay, we got a couple of these now. Yep. So we should have that happen a second time when the next troll... Well, actually, the next troll may be unconfused anyway. So, troll is no longer confused. Oops. This is a really helpful tool, by the way. I believe this is actually one of... this was one of Hexdecimal's contributions here, so this is really helpful. So yeah, so this was actually nice that we had two of those scrolls, so we were able to confirm that both trolls did in fact run into that problem. So orc attacks player, troll attacks player, orc attacks player, orc attacks player, troll attacks orc. That was exactly what I was hoping for. Troll attacks orc. Cool. Okay. So obviously we have something kind of cool in terms of the game that I want to preserve, but there's a problem with our implementation in terms of the random directions. I'm actually just going to double check here. I want to see whether or not it talks about the error. So we currently have two types of ranged spells that we use, one that targets the nearest enemy automatically, one that goes to and asks for a target. We'll finish this chapter by implementing a third type, one that asks for a target, but affects everything within a certain radius. Okay. Fair enough. I will confess I'm a little surprised that this error isn't addressed, which makes me think that I did something wrong on the implementation. So before I go to fix it, I want to see, well, there's two things I want to see. Number one, I want to see whether or not I failed in the implementation. And then number two, I want to see if the repository has the same error in it. So revert the AI back to the original state if the effect has run its course. Okay. Entities no longer confused. Self-entity, self-previous AI. So yes, else, pick direction. Okay, so as far as I can tell, this is an error. Now I have two options in terms of how to solve this. One, I could... here's the easy fix. I get rid of else. And say, right, the something or other stumbles forward as clarity returns to its eye. It is no longer confused, or something like that, right? So essentially what we're doing is we're extending this by one more turn just so that we can seed it with a XY direction. I could even just assign an XY direction here. Let's see if we can do better. And it would seem to me that one option that we have is we have the previous AI. So in this case, it would be the hostile enemy AI. Yep. So what we could do there would be self-entity AI, and then presumably we could do return self-entity AI dot perform. Let me make sure I got that right. And so what this should do is this should cause it to move consistent with the, well, in this case, it's only hostile enemy, but the reason why I wanted to specifically, I specifically wanted to assign this to a, the self-entity AI is that if we allow for different AI, if we allow for sort of different enemies to have different behaviors, I want that to move in a way that is consistent with the other one. So we'll do a bump action. Actually, let me just see what's bump action. That's not an AI. Okay. Yeah, so we couldn't call bump action because we don't have action with direction here. So the better call is to call perform. So again, just thinking exactly how this is structured. So under normal circumstances, we return an action, right? We return a bump action. So what happens when we return self entity AI perform? Well, when we do perform, there's one of several things that we can return. We can return a melee action, we can return a movement action, or we can return a wait action. So to me, this is returning the same data type that we're expecting. Although, oh, actually, I don't even need to get that clever. We're actually calling perform anyway. So that's even... Nope, this still works for me. Okay, yeah. So it's a little weird, but we're making this more consistent. So again, it's the question in terms of what's easy for me. What's so again, the easiest one is just to say direction X and direction Y will always run. There's no else about it, and then we just add some flavor text and say it's a feature, not a bug. This I think is more consistent with what the intention in the tutorial is. Actually, I did say I wanted to take... Well, hang on. Let's before we pat ourselves on the back, let's actually see how this works. So I need to cast confusion on somebody. Getting lucky with the lightning scrolls, but I don't want to get lucky with them. Leave me alone. Oh boy. I don't think I'm going to survive this. Let's try that again. That was a fun room to start in. You're kidding me. Oh, come on. All right, there's my confusion scroll. Let's hope I survive. Oh, I think yeah, I'm going to die before I get to provoke the bug. And I have no way to advance time. Damn it! All right. Okay. Let's not... As fun as I find this... oh, I also didn't test the... Okay, no longer confused, behaves exactly the way we expected. So we were able to solve that for ourselves. There's actually one other thing that I didn't test, which was the directional errors. Okay, so we'll use the confusion scroll. You must select an enemy. You cannot confuse yourself. Now, there is actually a small exploit here that if I wanted to see where the enemies are, presumably... Oh, no, you cannot target an area that you cannot see. So no, it wouldn't say you cannot target an enemy. Okay, but yeah, so there's a way that we were able to solve that. And again, I don't want to spend too much time talking about the tutorial, but I do want to see whether or not that bug actually remained in the... AIs and components. I want to see if that actually remained in the master. Hostile confused enemy. So perform if turns remaining self previous AI. Okay, interesting. Yeah. So I will confess that's a little surprising just because that seems like a more severe kind of error. But I'll maybe just change the way I report. This one I feel a little more comfortable saying. I don't think this was intended, but you know, I'm sharing this based on my experience. Okay. We currently have two types of ranged spells to use, one that targets the nearest enemy automatically and one that asks for a target. We'll finish this chapter by implementing a third type, one that asks for a target but affects everything within a certain radius of that target. I'm talking, of course, about an exploding fireball spell. To implement our fireball, we'll need a new event handler, single ranged attack handler. Single ranged attack handler isn't quite enough because it targets one enemy actor and nothing else. For our fireball, we want to select an area to hit, which can include multiple targets and might even burn the player. It's not actually necessary that the cursor be on an enemy either. The fireball can be offset to catch multiple enemies in the blast radius. So with that in mind, let's implement a new event handler which will handle area of effect attacks. We can call it area ranged attack handler and define it like this. So after single range, class area ranged attack handler, select index handler, handles the targeting an area within a given radius. The entity within the area will be affected. Engine radius int back callable tuple int optional action. Piggyback off the existing init. Right. Self radius. Okay, now we define on render. No. Good Lord. All right, self engine mouse location. Draw a rectangle around the targeted area so the player can see the affected area, presumably. Tiles. Console, draw frame, x equals x minus self dot radius minus 1. I will say, by the way, my inclination is to not give a radius. And sort of the logic here would be because, at least as far as I can understand, some roguelikes, I don't know if it was the original one that did this, didn't tell you what certain like what potions and things like that did. I think Rogue does this. I haven't played a lot of it, but I played a little. And then there's a really talented developer in the local game dev community called Eric Billingsley. And he did, I think it's called Into Ruins. It's actually a really nice little Pico 8 game. I think it's available on his itch.pay. Actually, if you can just give me a second here, I'll see. If I'm going to talk about it, I should give it a proper shout out. So. There it is. So yeah, Into Ruins. Very simple controls. Into Ruins is a roguelike for the Pico 8 fantasy console. There are no stairs, jump down holes in the ground to make your way to the bottom. You will encounter natural cave formations, crumbling dungeon rooms, and terrifying creatures on your way. There are no doors, tread carefully, or the creature in the next room might spot you. Light helps you explore more easily, but also reveals you to your foes. Fires can spread wildly through the environment, while glowing mushroom spores can mend your wounds. There are no classes or character levels. Expand your abilities by finding magical items on your descent, and bring them to their full potential with orbs of power. Each attempt is a new beginning. The different types of orbs, staves, cloaks, and amulets will not be immediately recognizable to you. Some experimentation is required to identify them. Hopefully, this is enticing you to check it out. Eric is, first of all, a really selfless guy. He is one of the people who hosts that local game dev collective, and it's been going for a long time. Jonah is another, I think he's the head of it. But Eric has also been very generous with his time and his advice, and he is somebody who has definitely been attached with some very impressive projects, of which I would include his own, by the way. So he did Spring Falls, which is available for mobile and also on Steam. But some of the for-hire work that he has done has been Cuphead and Tunic. So certainly a guy whose skills are in demand, somebody who is attached to a lot of very impressive projects, but I would want to highlight his own contributions. I actually thought Into Ruins was a really interesting game. I also have a thing for hexes. But in this case here, I really feel that had I not seen this project, I probably wouldn't have wound up doing the RoguelikeDev community does the roguelike tutorial. So big thank you to Eric, and please do check out his wonderful game. Back to work. Anyway, so what I was saying here is that there does seem to be a bit of a convention in terms of the roguelike, in terms of learning about how different things work. So, you pick up your fireball spell, you don't know, the forces that you are dealing with, and as a consequence, you potentially singe yourself. But it is also, I think, generally frowned upon. It's sort of you ask yourself the question, who's having fun here, right? So I imagine it is very fun for a developer to say, ha ha ha, I have pulled the rug out from under them. This is very fun. And the player's experience of that will be, why didn't you tell me this was going to kill me? I was on a good run. And in fact, so far, like when I think of some of the games that I enjoy, something like a Sunless Sea, you'll notice that Sunless Sea always tells you what the consequence of your actions is going to be. In fact, that also extends to a game I really like, Cultist Simulator, where it doesn't necessarily say, maybe it isn't as granular as you're going to get exactly, 2 widgets as a result of this action. But generally, if it's something that can hurt you, it gives you a little warning saying, hey, just so you know, this might annoy you. Make sure this is what you want to do. And, gives you a rough idea, like this is likely to happen. This is not very likely to happen. And, well, I think there is something to be said for uncertainty, and I think there can be some value for that. I am probably more convinced in terms of giving the player, I'm probably more convinced about giving the player the information. I think if I'm honest with myself, the idea of so I think there's something to be said for holding back the information as part of the procedural generation, right? So you don't know, you've got a color of a scroll, but you don't know specifically what that scroll is going to do, right? So that's the Into Ruins approach. And I think there's something interesting in that, because that kind of keeps the game fresh. And I think kind of a modern version of that would be a game like Diablo or Borderlands, or essentially any of these games where you sort of have this just plethora of items that are sort of generated at the moment. And I think some the surprise that comes from that is worth it. I think the lack of information is not that I don't necessarily think that's a I don't think that's a negative thing. The maybe the one exception I might make would be the existence of mimics. Although even then it would be sort of nice to tell people, hey, they're opening up a treasure chest and being surprised about the contents. I think that is consistent with an enjoyable game. The existence of mimics might be a bit of a tough one. It would be nice to sort of communicate that in some sort of way before, snapping the trap on somebody's hand, because at the very least you've sort of said there is a risk inherent in opening up a treasure chest. But yeah, I don't know. I just sort of feel like the idea of the kind of surprise which leads to a, well, how was I supposed to know result strikes me as one of those things where like you have a movie that really only works because it has a twist ending. And I feel that those movies, even if you feel really good about it at like in the moment, sort of on reflection, or if you watch it a second time, it's not so good. So yeah, I don't know. There are definitely some movies with some really good twists, which are very enjoyable. In fact, maybe are even more enjoyable on the follow-up time. And then there are some which are just, you feel, I mean, some of them, they don't even work the first time and you just feel angry that you wasted the time on it. But I sort of feel like the you blew yourself up with a fireball experience. It's probably a little bit more fun for me than it is for the player. Anyway. All right, and finally on index selected, I notice this one doesn't have any protections. Area ranged attack handler takes a callback like single ranged attack handler, but also defines a radius which tells us how large the area of effect will be. On render highlights the cursor, but also draws a frame, an empty rectangle around the area we'll be targeting. I feel like it would be kind of, actually, what would be nice? So I was just thinking the empty rectangle, I'm like, we can do better. What if we just sort of blinked on all of it? But it would actually be kind of neat if you, did the action and you saw it fill up. That would be kind of neat. This will help the player determine the area, which will be the blast. On index selected is the same as the one we defined for single ranged attack handler. To do damage, we'll need to implement the consumable class for the fireball scroll, open up consumable.py, and add this class. So we're adding the area ranged attack handler. And after healing consumable, self-consumer actor, optional, actions.action, engine message log, add message, select a target location, color needs target. Self-engine event handler, self-engine radius, self-radius, callback, lambda, xy, actions, item, action, consumer, self, parent, xy. and return none. Wait, why are we returning none? Because we're handing that off to the engine event handler and this function. So that's interesting that it says it's an optional actions action. I'll think about that later. Not self, engine, game. You cannot target an area that you cannot see. Hit false for actor in self-engine game map actors. If actor distance target XY is less than or equal to self dot radius self engine message log add message the actor name is engulfed in a fiery explosion taking self actor fighter take damage self damage targets hit true. If not targets hit, so this is an interesting one. It stops you from wasting the fireball. Raise possible. There are no targets in the radius. Self-consume. So what's kind of interesting about this one is that I think so in the name of safety, I think I can kind of understand I can understand not allowing people to cast a fireball for an empty effect, right? That's consistent with it. But interestingly enough, I believe you would be allowed to fireball yourself without damaging any enemies. So that might be, I'm not sure if that's consistent with the overall sort of approach that this game has taken to not infuriating the player, but that's maybe an extension that we can do a bit later. Fireball damage consumable takes damage and radius as arguments in init, which shouldn't be too surprising. Also, I'm sorry for making this another 3-hour one. Get action, similar to the confusion scroll, asks the user to select a target and switches the event handler, this time to area ranged attack handler. The callback is once again a lambda function, which is similar to how we handled the confusion scroll. Activate gets the target location and ensures that it is within the line of sight, and then checks for entities within the radius, damaging any that are close enough to hit. Take note, there's no exception for the player, so you can get blasted by your own fireball. If no enemies were hit at all, not strictly two, if no actors were hit at all, the impossible exception is raised and the scroll isn't consumed. As it would probably be frustrating to waste a scroll on something like a misclick. By the way, I'm assuming this, by the way. It may be that the way that actors works doesn't include... Oh yeah, actually does actors include player? Maybe it doesn't. But then how would the player get damaged? So no, I'm pretty sure it is inside actors. Yeah, so assuming at least one entity was damaged, the scroll is consumed. Let's add the new fireball scroll to entity factory so we can put it to use. So that comes after the confusion scroll. I'll scroll item 12 damage. Cool. And finally, we'll add it to proc gen. All right. 10% chance of getting a fireball scroll. This will be fun. Item chance less than or equal to, or sorry, less than 0.8. Entity factories, fireball, scroll, spawn, dungeon, X, Y. And of course, the probability that nothing gets generated because there's an enemy on it. Run the project now and blast away your enemies. Let's see how many times it takes us to get a fireball scroll. I think that's confusion, but that's awesome if I get it the first time. Oh, that's beautiful. It's like they knew. Whee! Oh no. Okay. Okay, so we're getting a lot of not implemented errors, but I'm not, so I haven't actually cast the fireball yet. I'm going to see if we can do that with an enemy. If this place is devoid of enemies, I'm going to freak. There we go. All right, so none of that's working. I'm going to guess that's a me problem. So under... I should really be looking at the... Oh, you know what? I never tried with the mouse button. Or sorry, with anything but the mouse button. I probably should have... Also, that's really weird that the player is put under the monsters. I should probably change that. Actually, you know what? Let's try this confusion scroll. So if I click on... All right, that worked. Okay, yeah, it doesn't, just no implementation at all. So this is obviously a mistake on my part. So, seems like the problem is with input handlers. On index selected. Oh, this may be... Okay, so on render, oh yeah, nope. Simple tab problem. Not the first time I've made that mistake, and certainly not the last. I am very, very lucky that it was the troll that used it on. Okay, let's see if we can find any fire. Again, I can always cheat with the numbers if I'm getting impatient, but I think the demands of doing this stuff on YouTube notwithstanding, I actually don't think it's that bad of an idea to say, let's play this through. If I'm looking for a specific outcome, let's actually play this thing through. Because if I'm saying, it took me 4 or 5 tries to get a fireball spell. All right. I don't know if I have the health to... Cool. Ooh, that's ambiguous. There are no targets in the radius. God, that's... Okay, that's obviously wrong. There clearly is a troll inside there. The troll is engulfed in a fiery explosion, taking 12 damage. I don't think that radius works the way that they are claiming it does. Okay. There's a couple things I want to test. So at least the fireball spell is working. So oh God. Ooh. I think it's pretty unlikely we'll have fireball scrolls. But yeah, like I said, I mean, the demands of a YouTube video aside, I don't think it's that bad of an idea to actually try to get this stuff based on the rolls. Now, we may reasonably say fireball scrolls should be rare. I wouldn't entirely disagree. Okay. No targets in the radius. The player is engulfed in fiery explosion and taking 12 damage. So yes, you can self-immolate. Do we have a second? So you want to get a little bit of a read on how the... Okay. So, fireball scroll. No targets, no targets. Now, this would tell me that I'm within the target. All right, yes. So, fair enough. There is consistency there. Sorry, there is one last... Now I'm going to test something here. If I just sit and wait, I'm hitting the wait button a whole bunch of times, and I was wondering whether or not the enemies would chase after me. The answer is no, they do not. But I don't have any fireballs to... All right. Don't be alive! The Reaper is coming! Probably should have grabbed the scroll. What exactly did I accomplish by running around like an idiot? Let's do that one more time. Again, I apologize. All I need is the ability to click and see if the fireball goes off. Okay, so you can't, yeah, you can't click to pick something in the inventory. You can click to blow yourself up. Cool. I do apologize for the time that took. With that, we've got 3 different types of scrolls and 4 types of consumables overall. With the event handlers that are in place, it should be fairly simple to add more types of consumables if you wish. Feel free to experiment with different types of attacks and add variety to your game. If you want to see the code so far in its entirety, click here. We actually already did that. So we'll add these. Completed part 9. And this time we will commit and sync because we're done for this week. So just as an overall read on where we are. So this was the 5th week of the RoguelikeDev does the complete roguelike tutorial. I certainly don't want to discourage anybody from jumping in and joining in, but if you want to participate in the actual event with the sort of the various interactions, there's only a couple weeks left. I definitely these 2 ramp up quite a bit in terms of what they ask of you, so this should be relatively easy to get through. These you're going to need to dedicate some time, but I don't think, like, I think somebody sufficiently motivated can definitely catch up if they're interested. But we're in the home stretch, and I'm definitely, my hope here is that I can do a couple of episodes early with the intention of taking the spare time between sort of now, or not now, but like the end of the tutorial, part 13, and the conclusion. That's going to be my opportunity to sort of do some expansions. And I think my original intention was to maybe instill a little bit of discipline and add some unit tests, but that actually strikes me as something that will take a lot of time and not necessarily teach me as much. So what I might do instead is I might start thinking about some of the improvements that I would do. Some might be sort of tidies or something like that, but I really do want to start thinking about some of the ways that I can enhance this and maybe make it my own. But obviously there's 4 more tutorials to go. At the end of August, we will see the finished product, and of course the videos and all of that are, or the not the videos, the source code is available on online. There's not nothing too special there. But thank you very much for watching, and we will see you in the next one. Take care.